That's a good picture. I like that picture a lot. That was taken at Skull's Rainbow Room in downtown Nashville. That was right after I proposed to Mariah, and she said yes. There was a dude next to me at the bar, and I had slid him my phone and said, "Hey, man, would you mind taking a picture of us? I'm about to ask her to marry me." So, just a little background before I get into this video. Um, the first 3 videos on this channel were made a couple months after my wife died. I didn't post them for a while afterward, but I had recorded them a few months after. Um, I hate to hear myself talk, and I know that's a common thing for a lot of people. Themselves speaking, not only me speaking, but when Mariah was alive, I made her a promise that I would start trying to do videos I was interested in. When I first thought about doing a YouTube channel, I wanted to do conspiracy theories, crazy shit throughout history that I was interested in. You know, I could talk about the Crusades for 3 hours, and like, where else are you going to do that except for YouTube and expect people to be interested in it? And she was always very supportive of that and really everything that I wanted to do. So anyway, I never got around to making any videos while she was alive. And I thought the first videos I should make, because her support and her being in my life was the direct reason I wanted to end up making videos and doing something with it, hopefully, was because of her. So it was a no-brainer for me to make the first 3 that I did, to tell anybody that stumbles on them about the story of us and her, because I believe she's a wonderful person. And if anybody stumbles on these videos, then I want them to know about her. And in fact, I would love for people to remember her more than me, because she deserves it. But another thing that I saw while rewatching a few of those videos in preparation for this one was a bunch of shit that I didn't like in myself, to the point where I almost listed those videos as private or deleted them completely, because I could see in that dude that looks very similar to me. I don't think I meant to at the time, but I think I was hiding somewhat in fear behind a story versus speaking more candidly about everything that's happened. And now, as I sit and record this today, it's the 16th of October, 2024, which would have been my third wedding anniversary, our third wedding anniversary. And in 4 days will be her second death anniversary. So sitting here now, 2 years almost removed from her death, it's a little easier for me to speak about without getting immediately choked up. And I wanted to fulfill a promise that I made to her, not only with making videos, but with finishing this series of videos dedicated solely to her and our story. I'm not going to edit this. I'm going to speak pretty candidly. And that's going to involve specifics around her death. So if you think that's going to bother you, then don't watch. And before I get into it, just one more thing. From the bottom of my heart, thank you to my friends and family. To everyone that was in that room with me that night. To everyone that found out what was going on in the middle of the night or the day after and dropped everything to catch the next flight or get in a car and drive anywhere from 10 to 12 and a half hours to be with me as soon as you could, to the people that I might not have even had a chance to catch up with since high school or shortly after, that have sent me messages up to and including like current, just checking on me and asking if I'm doing okay or if they can do anything, to the strangers who I've interacted with now that I work downtown, where wild shit comes up in conversation, and almost to a synchronistic degree, this topic will come up and I'll have a sense of something outside of myself encouraging me to talk about Mariah and what's happened. There's aspects of it I can't explain, but in any case, it doesn't matter. Thank you to everyone who's been with me throughout this, because I don't think I would be here if it weren't for you. And even if I made the decision to stick around without you, wherever it is I am now, I would be much far worse if you weren't in my life. So thank you. Every year around the fall, October and November, excuse me, Mariah and I would get sick. It would only ever be a couple days. It would be anything from like a stomach bug to a sinus infection or both. We ended up getting what seemed like both. And it would be one or the other first, and the other one right after. So I had been sick for a couple days. I got over it really quick. We were anticipating Mariah getting sick. Of course, she did. The same exact symptoms as mine. Stomach bug shit and sinus infection shit. It seemed normal. In fact, both of us were working out, still moving around through all of it, until a period of about a day and a half. Mariah and I noticed that it was, whatever it was hitting her a lot worse than it hit me. And she ended up having a rheumatoid arthritis flare-up that compounded everything and left her in bed for about a day and a half, extremely weak, not really able to get out of bed. I stayed home from work for 2 days to make sure that I could cook for her and carry her to and from the bathtub so she could either have a bath or take a shower and still be nice and clean and feel good, and that kind of stuff. A bunch of like electrolyte packets, some Gatorades, tons of water. You know, I knew that I couldn't do anything to take any of her discomfort away, but I could, do what I could to make her feel better. So if I remember correctly, that would have been the Monday and Tuesday of what ended up being her last few days. Tuesday night, if I remember correctly again, she was saying she felt a little bit better. And if she continued to feel better by the morning, then I could not worry about missing work and I could go. And that as long as she was able to move around, get some sunshine and have her coffee and that kind of stuff, then she would just get through the tail end of it. She and I both thought that the Monday and then Tuesday morning were the worst of it. So the next morning I check in with her, make sure she has everything set for the day so she wouldn't have to mess around with cooking for herself or anything like that. She'd just have a nice, relaxing day, do what she needed to do to feel better. She said she felt the same as far as like get on the right track and that I could just go to work. So I did, and we texted all the time if I wasn't home. So we had incredibly lively texts. She seemed great. She kept telling me that she was doing better. I was checking in with her all the time. And I had some relief while I was at work. I wasn't as totally worried about her. And that was until I got home, when I may have stepped in the door a couple steps and talked to her a little bit, checking in with her. She's just messing around her phone with a cup of coffee. And I realized when I was speaking to her that she could barely speak to me without being out of breath, as if she had just run a track and I was asking her thoughtful questions she needed to give me thoughtful answers to. She's really labored for breath. Not only was that fairly new, that was pretty alarming. So in the middle of her trying to speak to me at one point, I had said, "Do you need to go to the hospital?" And, normally throughout the course of our relationship, there have been a couple times, we've been together almost 10 years. There's a couple times that something's happened or one of us was sick or something, that the question came up of, do you want to go to the hospital? And normally there was like a back and forth a little bit, like, how are you feeling? Is it that bad? What's going on? That kind of thing. This time there was none of that. There was a clarity and a certainty of, yes, I need to go to the hospital. So I said, okay, that's what we're doing. I ran upstairs to change my clothes. I got her an overnight bag and packed her a bunch of shit and got her into the car. And we went to St. Thomas, a hospital that I had heard some good things about. When we got into the ER, we waited so that the front desk nurses could run some diagnostics, I suppose, grab her vitals and that kind of thing. At the time, they were still requiring people to wear a mask in there, which I feel negatively about. But the point is, she couldn't really breathe at all right now, or at the time. She definitely couldn't stand to have that fucking thing on her face. So we tucked off to kind of sit by ourselves away from view so she could pull it down and actually breathe as best she could on her own, and waited for them to call her name. They call her name 20 or 30 minutes later, and they're able to start running the vitals. Now, I only realized this with hindsight, because at the time it just seemed like an oddity. The nurse running her vitals, or getting her vitals, used 2 of the rolling thermometer carts, and sort of surprisingly remarked on how both of them must not have been calibrated, or they were both broken, because from multiple readings on both machines, they were reading that Mariah's temperature was, the first one said, I believe, 88 and then 87. And the second one said 87 and then 86, maybe. And of course, that couldn't be true, right? So they both had to be broken. So she goes about getting the rest of her vitals. Her blood pressure wasn't great, but it wasn't anything crazy from what I remember. They sit us back down after giving her a wristband with all her information and that stuff. And we're waiting for what I assume would be triage. Wait about 40 minutes and get to a middle room, waiting for a bed and triage. She's smiling at me. I'm trying to make her comfortable. Got some snacks from around the corner, so she had something in her stomach, because I didn't know the last time she ate. We get called into the triage room, where at this point, up until now, she's been sitting upright or just kind of leaning on me and my shoulder. Now she is incapable of standing. She's not able to sit upright. It's all she can do to lay down and kind of prop her head up to speak to me. Still having very labored breath. And by the time the nurse came in to check on her in triage, he realized right away that she was very, very sick. He prioritizes us for an ER room. An orderly comes to grab her with the bed that she's in, rolls her into the room, and starts to take her temperature off the wall thermometer. The wall thermometer reads 84 for her. The orderly has a pretty surprised and concerned look on his face and immediately steps out to grab the 4 nurses on the line in the ER. All 4 of them come in, aren't I don't think very sure what to make of that, immediately call a doctor and start doing things that they know how to do to warm her up. They wrap her in some Mylar in the bed with a bunch of blankets and then sort of prop up at the very end of her bed near her feet a heater to try to warm her back up. And at this point, they realize that her blood oxygen is incredibly low and her blood pressure is just scattering all over the place. The ER doctor comes down, is talking with most of the nurses, and the decision is made to intubate Mariah because uh, she just was not breathing well. Um, and her oxygen was very low. I don't remember the specific numbers, but it was below 90. So at this point, um, we've been there. I think we got there around, I guess, between 5 and 6. It's probably around, I want to say, between 8 and 9:30, maybe 10. And before she's been intubated, she's passed out. She's so weak from whatever's going on that she can't stay awake. Which, if I remember correctly, was another one of the variables that led to her being intubated. During this process and during her having the tube in her mouth while we were on the ER floor, she and I had communicated with each other 3 more times before she died. Um, the first time I'm going to keep private. Um, the second time was when she had been intubated, and she woke up and realized that she had a tube down her throat, and she looked around a little panicked, but I was right there with her when she was looking around, so we caught eyes, and I said, "Hey, listen, you're not breathing well, and you keep falling asleep, which is fine. But they wanted to put this in to make sure that you could keep getting oxygen because you need to breathe. And your blood oxygen level is not well right now. It's steady, but it's not good. So this is going to help you feel better. I know it's weird and it sucks. I've had one too, but it's okay. It just has to happen." And she kept kind of weakly gesturing up to her neck. I assumed communicating with me to try to ask me to take it out or have them take it out. And I kept holding her hand down, saying that it was important and it's okay. Just go back to sleep and everything's going to be okay. Because they had given her medicine to keep her calm, I guess, or relaxed. So she would have inevitably went back to sleep. So as she was closing her eyes, she nodded a little bit and said, "I love you," or mouthed, "I love you." And I said, "I love you too. And I'll see you in a little bit when you wake up." The next batch or the next dose of her medicine wore off a couple hours later. We were still in the ER. And at this point, I'd been made aware that she was on the list for the ICU. Now, in that conversation with the doctor that she had been listed for ICU, I still had no idea really what was going on. After they had intubated her and hooked the heater up to warm her back up, they had started taking blood cultures and running a bunch of other tests. The blood cultures is the one that's important. Those take a while to come back. So I didn't have the answers for it until later, but that would be key to the end of the story as it would turn out. And unfortunately, it was time-based. And at this point, it had not crossed my mind that she could be running out of time. It only ever first crossed my mind how serious this could be when, after she was intubated and before we'd had our last conversation, um, that I was in the middle of asking the doctor who had come back, can you give me an idea of, he ended up cutting me off. What I was going to say was, can you give me an idea of when she might wake up? Like a time frame, because the nurse had just discussed with me the medicine might knock her out for a little while, but it's different with everybody, and then had to step out. I was in the middle of asking, can you give me an idea of when she might wake up? Because I was going to try and sleep while she was sleeping. But in the middle of that sentence, when he cut me off, I had said, can you give me an idea of, and he goes, what her chances are? And I was kind of shocked because I didn't realize we were in that room. And I said, well, that's not what I was going to ask you, but sure, if you know that, I would like to know that. And he said, it's hard to tell. She's very clearly very unwell. So the rest of the time that we were in the ER was the nurses trying to make her as comfortable as possible and getting back results of all the tests that they were running and that the doctor had ordered. And so far, nothing coming up. While she slept, around between 9:45 and 10:30, I had started sending text messages out to people, to family and close friends, saying, kind of giving an idea of what was going on, or the literal of it. We're in the hospital. She's been intubated. I'm not sure what's going on. Somewhere between 10 and 11, I saw her kicking her toes a little bit, and the nurse had said that she would become more lively as she woke up. I went over to her bed. I was just kind of playing with her hair, and she opened her eyes and was just staring at me. And I started to say some things to reassure her and calm her down. And when I got to, you just need to get a bunch of rest while we try to figure out what's going on, but everything will be okay. When I said that, she had been sort of like weakly looking around, and as she heard me say that, she snapped back to me very, 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 very clearly and just shook her head. And I said, I don't want to hear that shit. You're going to be fine. I promise you're going to be fine. They just need to figure out what the hell's going on their end, and everything will be better. I don't want to hear that shit. I love you, and you need to sleep. And so she stared at me a couple seconds more, and then she sort of nodded and then said, I love your mouth. I love you. And then fell back to sleep. And that was the last time that we communicated with each other, while she was awake anyway. Her blood pressure and blood oxygen and her breathing were all problematic throughout the rest of that night as we waited for an ICU bed. I had a lot of startling jumps awake as I heard machines start making troublesome sounds. The morning came, not much sleep later, and an ICU bed became available, I think around 7 or 8 a.m. Wednesday morning. As she was being transferred for ICU, my stepmother met me at the hospital. My father was not too far behind and had picked me some clothes up that I could switch into. Uh, Her room had a shower, so I was able to get cleaned up. And I was in the mindset of settling in with the idea that she's going to be here a while. She's in essentially a medical coma right now. She hasn't woken up again or shown any signs of waking up. Um, so I'm thinking about things that I can do that, maybe she can hear me, and I'm going to be here anyway. She had talked a lot about wanting to read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings because she was such a big fan of the movies and had never read the books. I have pretty nice copies of those, so I was thinking the only time I'm going to go back home is to go get those books. And if I have to work, I have to work, but I'm going to be here every day and I'm going to be reading her these books. And maybe by the time that I'm done, she'll wake up. In any case, doctors were still running tests, trying to make her, again, as comfortable as possible because none of us have any idea what's going on. I'm trying to keep her mother, who lives in North Carolina, updated at the time. And then our roommate at the time comes in. My sister comes in. And we all just kind of settle in to try to figure out what's going on and to be there for when she wakes up. There's a point where during the night, well, I should say this first. In the afternoon, I had stepped out to call Mariah's mother to update her on what was going on. At the moment that I had stepped out, Mariah was obviously unwell, but she was stable. I don't know what happened as I stepped out, but while calling her mother and being on the phone with her for 15 minutes, my sister rang my phone over and over. And I ended up getting off the phone with her mother and telling her mother, everything seems to be okay for right now. I'll call you with more updates. As that was happening, I was getting these nonstop phone calls from my sister. So I got off the phone with her mother. I call my sister as I'm walking back to the front. She goes, "Hey, our stepmother needs to talk to you right now about some things the doctors need to do." So I jog to the front of the ICU or the entrance. My stepmother, my father, my friend, and my sister are all there waiting for me to come talk to them. And they let me know that the doctors have decided to do 3 different procedures, uh, 3 different things that they've decided that she needs. None of them will fix the problem, whatever the problem is. Any one of the 3 on their own could kill her. And she needs all 3 of them in the next half hour just to buy her some more time. So, of course, I go up to sign that paperwork. I come back outside because I'm not supposed to be in the room at the time that they do this. For clarity, one was introducing a dialysis machine, another was a femoral stent or a femoral exploratory thing, and then one other procedure, I think something similar to a spinal tap or something like I don't know. But that was the way it was described to me. I walk back outside as they begin these 3 procedures. And for the first time, the idea that it's serious enough that she might not make it enters my head. It doesn't cross my mind that she won't. That never crossed my mind until I saw it happen. But the idea that it's that serious crossed my head that time. Um, I decided while they were doing this to go into the church chapel and have a discussion. Well, it wasn't a discussion. I just said some stuff that I hope would happen. But the main part of it was I promised that regardless of what did happen, that I wouldn't be mad. Luckily, the procedures all went well, and she did not die. I remember her being hooked up to that dialysis machine, and I don't know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but as the machine cleaned her blood, whatever was in her was being brought out by the machine, and just uh, a black bag, a, a clear bag filled with black nonsense in her blood, the same as her stomach. I, I couldn't figure out what the hell was coming out of her stomach. Um, Many hours later, my stepmother and I were in the room. Also, apologize. I should clarify. Once these procedures were happening with her, the ones that she luckily got through, my sister called Mariah's mother and said, "You need to get on the next flight to Nashville." Right after I had called and said that things were okay for now, which I've always felt incredibly bad for. So many hours later, just before her mom landed at BNA in Nashville, my stepmother and I were in the room, and it was just the two of us, Mariah in her bed, and one of the nurses. Seemingly out of nowhere, Mariah flatlines for the first time. As soon as she flatlined, the nurse jumped on her to start giving her compressions and order a crash cart. I stared at her and then at the machine, thinking that the machine had to be wrong. And my stepmother grabbed my hand and led me out of the room. We got to the ICU waiting area, and the only thing that I could think to say over and over again was, "God, please let her be okay." Over and over again. My stepmother called my father, who was downstairs. He jumped on the elevator to come up, and they both sat out there with me until we found out what happened. Um, One of the ICU desk nurses came out and said that they were able to bring her back and that she was now stable and we could go in and be with her again. I decided to not call Mariah's mother while she was already on the way, to let her know that until she had already got there. My sister and my friend went to go pick her up from the airport, and eventually she got there and came in and saw Mariah for the first time. And then we waited a while. very early in the morning, after my father had run out to grab food for everybody, and we ate in the ICU lobby downstairs. And later on, when he and my stepmother had decided to call it for the night and then head back about 40 minutes south where they lived, we were saying our goodbyes outside. Myself and Mariah's mother were obviously going to stay in the room. My sister and our roommate were going to stay until they got tired and then head back to their houses. My sister went upstairs to stay with Mariah in the room while our roommate, Mariah's mother, and I went outside to say goodbye to my stepmother and my father. We said goodbye. They left. And for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, we sat outside and talked and smoked cigarettes and just tried to relax for the first time. Mariah seemed stable. She seemed almost like she was sleeping versus fighting through anything for the first time in this whole ordeal. And as we walked back inside, on our way to the elevator, we heard someone on the PA say, "Code blue, ICU, room 12." We knew what that meant, and we knew who that was. We ran to the elevator, got up to the floor. I ran through the entirety of the ICU to room 12, where Mariah was, and I saw every person that worked on that floor standing outside the room. I was close enough to the door that I saw 7 or 8 different people give Mariah compressions and paddles. I'm under the impression that I could hear her ribs cracking as the compressions went down. When the compressions were being switched over, I could see her body convulse, and I could hear her snore. And all I could think was, God, let her be okay. And hold her mother's hand as my sister held mine, and my friend put his hands on my shoulders. I started to hear a pulse again, and I had an insane amount of weight leave my shoulders, and I just felt relief all over my body in that moment when I heard her pulse come back. But as we walked into the room, I heard one of the doctors say, "Where's the family?" So I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "I'm her husband. What's going on?" And he said, "Listen, we were able to get her pulse back through CPR and through a pretty large amount of drugs. But she's been without oxygen for minutes now. And the thing is, even if that wasn't likely to be an issue, as soon as the drugs wear off, this is going to happen again." So the decision that you need to make is to tell us that every time she flatlines, we do this process again and get her pulse back for however long it lasts with the medicine. Or you tell us not to give her medicine to do this again. Two weeks before I got sick, Mariah and I had a conversation on our patio. every day I would get home from work, if it was nice out, she and I would sit out there and talk to each other for hours between smoking and having coffee. We loved talking to each other. Two weeks before this, us being sick, we had had a conversation that I instigated and had been instigating for a couple of years of us being together, that she never wanted to entertain. I would bring up the fact that I did not know what she wanted to have happen if something happened to her. But I instigated this conversation by saying, you don't know what I would like to have happen, because up until recently, I hadn't really thought about it or decided. But the fact is, Mariah doesn't work. I take care of all that kind of crap. And she keeps a beautiful place for us. The chances of me going in a car accident or something at work, something, are far more likely than her. And I wanted her to know, if that were to happen, God forbid, this is what I would like to have done. But because I'm telling you this, I would also like to know what you would like to have done. I had tried to bring this conversation to her attention a couple times throughout the years, and she never wanted to entertain it. She never wanted to think about uh, me leaving. But I said, no, we need to have this conversation. I need to know that you'll be okay. I need to know that you have the tools that you need to deal with this daily crap, so that you can just focus on healing if it's me that goes. And I need to know what's going on with you, just so we both have it in mind. Part of that discussion led to her saying, if there's ever a situation that I have been without air, and she was actually thinking drowning or something like that because she wasn't a strong swimmer. She said, if there's been something where I end up like, that famous thing from when we were younger, with Terry Schiavo, very dissimilar from what happened. But the argument that we remembered when we were kids with Terry Schiavo was that, who's to say, what's still there, even in lack of oxygen or brain death. Where she landed on it for herself was, if there's a chance that I wake up being anything less than I am for you, or if I'm different and can't go through life the way that I am now or better, then I don't want to do that. And I trust you to not let me be in that position. So with that in mind, that night, and knowing that regardless of having that conversation or not with her, that it would be just pumping drugs into her until they ran out of drugs, I guess, would be the only other option. I made the decision to respect what she wanted to the best of my ability in that moment. I turned and looked at her mother and shook my head. And then I crawled in bed with her. I moved a bunch of the shit around so that I could feel her skin on mine. And in a sort of cruel irony, that was the first time that it felt like we were at home together in the last few days. And there's a lot of personal stuff that happened in that 25 minutes that I'm open to talking about, but not necessarily putting on a YouTube video. At least where I'm by myself in a cold room recording and going through all this in my head again. Um, on my anniversary, no less. But there are moments that occurred that night that I'll never forget. And again, 25 or 30 minutes later, she flatlined for the last time. Uh, Maybe 15 or 20 minutes after she died, the last of the blood cultures came back, and I was told what they believed was the reason. Um, they had said that she had somehow got a strep A blood infection that coursed through her at such a rate that it started to shut down her organs, and she had begun to go septic. Uh, so it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing. Is it the strep A that caused the sepsis that caused death, or was it the sepsis because the strep A could have been dealt with if sooner or whatever? I know that I was told by 8 or 9 different professionals that night when that result came in, because everyone was still watching me screaming in that room, that when that result came back, everyone came to me and said that there was nothing that I could have done, which there's a finality in that. It puts to bed a fear. It puts a fear to rest that I could have done something better, that I could have noticed. I mean, she didn't have any of the symptoms of that I'm aware of as strep. But again, it was a blood infection somehow. So it helped, I guess, to be told that there was nothing I could have done, but there's nothing that makes you feel more helpless at the same time. I worried that maybe if I'd have just taken her sooner, that they could have done something. And they outright told me we would have treated her like we treat a stomach bug, maybe given her antibiotics, and then you would have woken up alone in your own bed versus this one. And that's helpless too. Um, so shortly after they had come to prepare her body to be taken, and that needed to happen because I don't think under a different circumstance I would have left that room. Uh, I drove her mother home, which is fucking crazy. I don't know what I expected. Didn't expect any of that to happen, but the fact that you can just drive home after that is wild to me. I don't know if that's right, but that's what happened. Um, that was the saddest fucking car ride you can imagine. I don't know if we even said anything to each other. We got back to my house because it wasn't a fucking home anymore. Um, and we talked and cried all night. I had friends that found out how bad it was in the middle of the night that got tickets for the first tickets for the first flight that they could get on the following day. And I had friends that got a text message or a call from my friend, my stepmother, or my sister that they immediately called out of work, got in their cars and drove. A couple of them were 9 hours, a couple of them were 10.5 to 11 hours away. And I was awake that night when they pulled in. They didn't stop. They drove all the night through. My father and stepmother offered to have their house as a meeting place for a memorial that weekend because Mariah wanted to be cremated. And I had people in my life tell me absolutely and incredibly beautiful things that weekend. And since then, um, it feels like I've been in an almost different universe, almost, or or at least that none of this is real for the last 2 years, almost 2 years. Uh, Almost everything has lost its color, metaphorically, and if it still has color, it's certainly no longer as vibrant as it used to be for me. Uh, I almost treat old pictures of myself the same way I do when I look at pictures of her. It's like, oh, that person is gone now. I have a lot of memories of it, but they're not here anymore. Now, since she's died, I've had some incredible experiences that relate to her, but those are stories for a different time, I think. They'd probably be hours long in themselves. But I feel as if this video was important to make to somewhat finish what I'd started and keep the promises that I made. Um, and not to make myself sad talking about her death, but to illustrate how fragile life can be. Because depending on where you look at it, it was either 4 days or less than 48 hours that I lost someone I love more than I can remotely articulate. And I know that some of my experiences that I've talked about with people in person have left an imprint and from what they've told me has made their lives better, either with how they walk around in general thought or directly influencing a betterment in their own romantic relationship because they take into account that you don't need to be 85 at the end of your life or the last few years and your partner goes before you do. Um, it can happen at 29 and 31 in a fucking blink. In less than 48 hours, it can happen. And it's done a lot. It's forced me to think a lot differently about things. You never know what kind of day somebody's having. And you don't really realize how quickly you can connect with another human being through something like pain. I don't like the I don't like the use of the term trauma dumping. I think I understand what it means when someone's trying to play the victimhood game with a new person and they dump a lot of their perceived trauma on a new person to see kind of where they stack up in a sort of hierarchy. I don't think that's good. But I do recognize when I come into contact with someone who I do not feel is giving me that perception. I'm certainly not trying to give them that perception. But how quickly, in less than 5 minutes, if you're having a truly honest conversation with another human being, how quickly you can figure out or have an implication of how much pain someone has been in or is in. And I think a true depth and capacity of pain puts into perspective your capacity, your increased capacity for joy and what you can find meaningful and how meaningful you can find it. Or at least that's what has happened to me so far. I've tried to record this video 3 times and I still have not thought of any idea of where to end it. Um, but if this story, anything about this part of my life, uh, can in any way help somebody, I don't know. I have a few ideas roundabout how they might influence certain things. Excuse me. But I don't, even if it just helps to hear because you're a friend of mine who wasn't immediately here for it and you wanted to know more of what I went through, but didn't want to ask because you were worried about me going back through it in my head or reliving it or something like that, then good. This has purpose. If you're someone who has been through this, you're not alone, as awful as that is. But you're not the only one. And I understand how excruciating it is. I also now understand, having been through this, understanding I care about the people in my life enough to hope that they never experience what I did because I care about them enough that I don't want them to feel this. If you're someone who you've identified in yourself that you take things a little too seriously, if you really worry about small shit and you let it get to you, and you've realized that this is a problem in your life and that really life hasn't been that bad. And if you're letting tiny shit get to you, maybe it's time to expand your horizons a little bit. If you've come to that in and of yourself, that's incredible. And hopefully, people that are in a position that I'm in and you hearing about them will reinforce the fact that sometimes uh, small shit really doesn't fucking matter. Because real shit could happen. And if you let small shit dig at you, when real shit happens, you're going to be in big trouble. I don't know. Perhaps there are other ways that this could be beneficial to hear. or beneficial to know about throughout your life, whoever you are that stumbles on this, or friends, family of mine that weren't there for the entirety of the thing or didn't know certain details. And for anyone who sees this, I have chosen to be very open about this. I don't enjoy by any means talking about this, but I have made a decision to be open about talking about it because A, it allows me to talk about Mariah, and I fucking love talking about her. And B, I have to acknowledge that there are things that people have said to me in passing, or things that I have heard on a podcast, a show, in passing with strangers, that have affected my life, that have caused me to think differently, if only for a day. And it was worth it to me at the time that they said it, and they'll never know that it had an effect on me. It was worth it enough to me for that day, that month, or the rest of my life that I lived and imparted that knowledge into myself, that they did it. So as slimy as I feel for making a video like this where I'm discussing something like my wife's death, um, I have the ability and the interest to be open enough to talk about it with strangers. So why not people on the internet I'll never meet, in the hopes that maybe it'll help something that you might have going on. Maybe just knowing about the possible tragedies of the world will make you appreciate the rest of the day after you listen to this. That's something. And it's better than nothing ever happening and me just suffering for it for no reason, maybe. In any case, if there's anything about this that you're curious about, I'm willing to talk about it. And I've noticed that through different friends talking to me about this, it has caused me to investigate aspects of myself if I haven't already thought about it, if that makes sense. I've been asked questions about this situation in my life afterwards compared to my life before that I had not considered on my own and therefore did not have an answer for. So I got the benefit of thinking about how absolutely beautifully she affected my life and come up with an answer sufficient to my own criteria, much less the person asking. And that has led me to really evolve and deepen my thinking on some things, which has been overall pleasant. At the very least, knowing that I have the capacity to do that, especially when it comes to such a painful topic. So in honor of my lovely missus, let this be a conclusion to the first 3 videos I put on this channel, in the hopes that people would get to know her a little bit better, because she was wonderful and incredibly deeply missed. And from here on, I would like to, in dedication to her, make the videos that she always supported, at least the idea of me making, the crazy shit that I'm into. Yeah. Thank you again for watching.